Good morning, everybody. Here we are on a Monday, another Monday. uh, I hope you had a chance to tune in to last week's radio show. If you're not aware that I do a radio show, I am a weekly guest, if you will, on the Boolamaste radio station, which is based in Langley, British Columbia, but it serves as a source of entertainment and news and resources for the South Asian community and Fijian community locally and across the globe. And so every Thursday from 6 to 7, I am the guest there, and I'm interviewed by one of their wonderful staff. And we talk about a variety of different topics. A lot of it will be focused on parenting, but I will draw into that a lot of different contemporary issues as examples, because I'm often trying to draw people's attention to something that's bigger, kind of bigger psychological, archetypal orchestrations, if you will, within society, and a lot of the themes that we're dealing with, of course, are ancient, if you will. Been around since the beginning of time, because there have been parents, there have been moms and dads, there have been husbands and wives. This whole relationship thing that we deal with has obviously been around since the beginning. So what we're talking about, is very fundamental to all people. But I hope to be able to offer a different idea, a different approach than what is often quite traditional. So I hope you can tune into the show on Thursdays, like I said, 6 to 7, and just go on the Google or what have you, and Google Bula Maste, that is Bula and then Masti radio. And then they also stream it live on Facebook. And so if you go to Facebook and you search for Boolamaste Radio, you'll find their station there as well. And, one of the things that we keep talking about on the show, if you will, is the phenomena of why people don't want to seem to change. And that is a huge conversation, and I want to try to provide a position where people can see more deeply into that phenomena. I see it every day, and I'm sure you see it. I've even done it. We live in the information age. We've got so many resources available, and not only are they available, they're instantly available. You'd think that as a society we would be experiencing an acceleration of feeling better, whether it be healing mentally, emotionally, physically, relationally, financially, whatever it is. We should be experiencing acceleration in those areas, but in many ways we're not. In fact, statistically, we are seeing higher levels of anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation in our communities than ever before. And then you can look at things like the opioid crisis, or, the number of divorces, or, all sorts of stats, tend to point to what I think is the human condition. But there's certainly something going on right now that, in spite of all these technologies that we have, we seem to be sinking a little deeper into it. You look at the stuff that's going on societally and politically, especially down south, the divides between, different groups, special interest groups, political divides, gender divides. There's just all sorts of division that seems to be incredibly inflamed. I mean, I've been on the planet for almost 60 years, and these are issues and discussions that were happening back then. again, you think with all this technology and all this wisdom that we're surrounded with, we'd be in a better condition. And so this is kind of what's led to, or what we spoke of briefly in the last radio show. And the interviewer asked me if we could talk about this Thursday. And that would be, April 11th. If you want to tune in, just kind of, how is it that given all this, the resources and the technologies at our fingertips, that we're still so stuck in misery and anxiety and things of this nature? Like, why is that happening so slow? And I one of the things that I have spoken of before, and this is where I'm going to go with it this Thursday, because it can be very complex, a discussion of this type. And I want to try to at least speak into something maybe a little more core, so we don't get kind of hung up in all the little ideological details. I want to maybe focus it around one significant idea and bring it back to the phenomena of entitlement and indulgence that we're seeing in this day and age. I've spent, 20-something years, started back in 1993 or so, of studying the phenomena of entitlement and indulgence. At that time, I was an addictions counselor. And so I actually came up with kind of a philosophy and a way of seeing things, which I was calling addiction as entitlement and indulgence. And I'll expand that later, especially for those of you interested in the topic of addictions. But I've expanded that body of work significantly, and I've applied it to many, many different things and all the roles that I've played. I've been a family therapist now for the last 10 years. But prior to that, part of my role was working in employment and vocational services, working with people who are having chronic issues to employability. And then, of course, my work took me into looking at trauma and the impact of trauma on employability. And so anytime you see trauma showing up, you're going to see an inflated sense of entitlement and indulgence. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time right now explaining those, also, although it's necessary. In many of my other videos, if you go to the YouTube channel and take a look, I've taken a lot of time to break down the dynamics of that, the mechanics of it. So I hope you'll do that so you can better understand what I'm about to say. I want to kind of cut to the chase a little bit, and to do that, I want to share with you an observation. And like many of you, I'm a fan of what we might call the intellectual dark web these days. In other words, I don't get a lot of my news anymore from mainstream news. I'm more proactive. I like to seek out different avenues of news, and especially on YouTube and things where I'm actually listening to 2-hour long debates and lectures about different topics. And I happened to tune into one the other day. I think it was an hour-long show being facilitated, hosted by a guy named Larry Elder. Some of you may know his work. He's been around for quite some time. Started out as a lawyer, became a talk show host, and has become pretty prominent in the United States as a voice of, if you will, Black America, or just America, period, because he's certainly controversial in what he has to say. But he is a Black man who has really taken some pretty powerful stances in terms of what's going on in the United States politically, what's going on socially, etc. And anyway, he had a panel on of, I think there was maybe 3 other Black men and a Caucasian man. And one of the classic parts of discussions these days is, and a lot of it has been focused by the Black Lives Matter movement. And much of that movement had been trying to highlight, the number of black lives that are being taken at the hands of white police officers or non-black police officers, and just how many black lives are being lost, period, in the United States, etc. And there was one of the panelists, a younger black fellow, who was representing, I think, the Black Lives Matter movement, and he was talking about how many black lives are lost to every year by black lives taken by people who are non-black, and I think he said it was about one per day. So I think he and Larry agreed on that stat. There was just over 300 black lives taken every year at the hands of non-black people, and I think it was non-black people. I don't think it was white officers. I think they were talking about black lives being taken by non-black people. And Larry, presented a well-known stat, is that is that the number of black lives being taken by black people is significantly greater. In fact, it was 20 to 1. So in other words, every day there's a black life being taken by someone who isn't black, but on that same day there are 20 black lives taken at the hands of other black people. And Larry's consistent challenge to that is that why isn't Black Lives Matter concerned with that? Because that's where most of the black lives are being taken. And the young fellow kept trying to refocus the conversation to the 300 or 350 or whatever it was, but one per day are being taken in the United States at the hands of, if you will, or by non-black people. And it was like Larry just kept shaking his head and going, but there's 20 black lives being taken every day by other blacks. So why isn't the Black Lives Matter movement concerned with that? And there wasn't really much of a response by the panel or what have you to that question, but I got to thinking about it again, just on the backdrop, a lot of the work that I've done around trauma and the entitlement and the indulgence dynamic, and I'm going, isn't that really odd? That there are 20 times more lives being taken on any particular day because of something else other than what this person is pursuing. Like, you think anybody in their right mind would be more concerned with the 20 lives being taken rather than the one life being taken. And it's not at all to say that the one life being taken is dismissible or not important. That's the furthest thing from the truth. But just to say that, let's say I'm trying to, to save somebody's life, or I'm so fixated on this particular idea that while I'm fixated on the idea of the one person dying today, that 20 die or 19 more die. Well, I'm sitting here trying to prove how right I am that black lives are being taken by non-black people. 19 more people will die today because I'm more obsessed, I want to say. I'm more zealous about being right about this one idea. Isn't that insane? I mean, I just, the more I listen to the panel talk about this, and the more I listen to Larry try to, speak into this, it's like, okay, but there's 20 black lives being taken today at the hands of other black people. That's what we should be talking about. That should be getting 90% of our attention. Instead, it's not getting any attention at all. And 99% of the energy is going in to try to somehow, what do you want to call it, emphasize, highlight, be right about this one narrative. And what is that narrative? They're both narratives of what I would say are the victim narratives. But the one narrative that's really got people's attention, is the racial divide, that victim narrative there that people seem to be so fixated on that they would allow 19 more to die that particular day and get no attention at all. And I'm thinking about this, about the radio show coming up, and I'm thinking about this on the question, why is it that people don't want to change? You see, Larry Elder in that interview was really trying to shift the narrative. He was trying to take the narrative of, hey, we're being victimized and by society, by centuries of systemic discrimination. It's that may all be true, but what can you do about it? Because really, and what he's saying is really the bigger problem is not out there somewhere. It's really within the community. It's within the Black community. You've got incredibly high rates of homicide, Black on Black homicide. We need to look at that, he says. And to me, that was kind of the same idea that I work with all the time around personal accountability with people. There seems to be this tendency, this seduction, if you will. That's why I call it an indulgence. There seems to be this inflated right now human phenomena. It's always been around, but it's really inflated right now around embracing victimology. It's around embracing the victim narrative. And the victim narrative, the way that it's set up, is that the cause of one's distress is always a circumstance or an individual or a group outside of oneself. That's the victim narrative. The victim narrative is not one that says, maybe I had something to do with that, or maybe there's a level of personal accountability. Maybe it had something to do about, more with me. And that's kind of what Larry was pointing to, but more at a societal, at a national level. He's going, wake up here, like you're focused on this little thing over here, but the elephant in the living room is really over here. We really need to be focusing on the personal accountability in our own communities and quit blaming everything out there, because that's the red herring. That's what's going to keep us focused. That's what we're going to keep our eyes on when 19 more people are going to die today, because of the elephant in the living room that we're not talking about. And to me, psychologically, this is the elephant in the living room that doesn't get talked about. Absolutely. When we ponder why people don't change, why healing is so slow, why change is slow, is because really the call here, and we know this when we look at wisdom teachings that we have available to us, the solution is always one of personal accountability. I mean, you look at situations through history in which people or communities have been traumatized and how they've risen above that trauma. It's always because there was some possibility of a personal transformation, a personal resilience, usually as the result of some sort of deep transpersonal discipline or insight that the person was connected to, some transformative ideas that resided within them that they could find resilience in and vitality. And so I want to say, or at least what it looks like to me, is fundamentally, is that change is often slow, healing is often slow. People avoid change because they're highly invested in the victim narrative. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about in the radio show today is why. Why so invested? Why, when there's a better way to go, why, when there's a faster way to go, do we not take that road? And what I want to dive into even more deeply is that this really is an indulgence. Now, the definition of indulgence is a free will choice. You got to get that. Indulgences imply free will choice to engage in any thought, process, or thing that creates adverse consequences. It's a free will choice. Another way to think of an indulgence is it's a guilty pleasure. And that invites a whole other conversation, a deeper conversation into what we might say is more of the shadow aspects of the victim archetype, if you will, or the victim position or narrative. Is that there's something seductive to holding that position. There's some perceived payoff to it. Why would we hang on to a victim narrative when there's another way to go? I mean, for those of, another way to say it is complaining. Why do people complain? I mean, like me, you, we all do it from time to time, right? I don't know about you, but my experience of complaining, when I'm complaining about things, I feel depleted. I feel disempowered. I feel like it sucks the life out of me. So there's nothing good about it. I mean, all complaining comes from some inner feeling of victimization. So there's nothing life-giving, there's nothing energizing, there's nothing healing about, if you will, being stuck or adhesed to a victim narrative. And then this is where I need to be clear, is that what I'm talking about is an indulgence. Now, certainly there are ways, and it's even a necessity, to be honest and authentic about our hurt, but not to stay there. And what I'm talking about as an indulgence is when people remain there in spite of adverse consequences. So like in this panel discussion, when this individual keeps, adhering to this ideology, focusing on, the one death per day, when what really needed to be focused on was the 20 deaths per day. You see, that's an adverse consequence. Add up the numbers. There is a high price to pay, a high cost to holding on to that victim narrative. While that person is, barking up that tree, 19 more people are dying. And so why would that person continue to pursue that ideology, that narrative, when there's so much devastation occurring? Why? Well, there has to be a seduction to it. There has to be something that the individual or community is getting out of it. Because it's a fixation that's a life-taking fixation, like literally in this situation. So yeah, so this is going to take us deeper into some of the shadow aspects of the victim narrative and the victim position or archetype, which again, this is the elephant in the living room. Nobody's talking about this stuff. Why? Because it isn't PC, right? It isn't politically correct. People start talking about this stuff, and to ruffle feathers is putting it lightly. But in the field of psychology and you know and even just truth, we have to pursue it. 19 more people are dying every day because we don't pursue that. So I hope you're interested in this. I hope that you're seeing it like I'm seeing it. I mean, our friends down south, as I've said in previous videos, are really focusing for us right now. Because when you kind of look at what's been going on in the political climate in the United States, is that what used to be called the left is becoming extreme left, and it's actually the people who are saying that they're all about peace and love and equity. All those people are actually the most hostile right now. And they're the most hostile as justified by what? By a victim narrative. We're actually in a really interesting, and I was going to say wonderful time right now, where we get to see this shadow side of the victim narrative, the victim archetype being played out. And I think a lot of us, the average person who just watches this stuff, can see it. We see people being so self-righteous that, they're giving themselves permission to inflict emotional, verbal, even physical pain on other people. They feel entitled to it. This is the nasty shadow side of the victim archetype, the victim narrative. And in my work, this is all well known, and most depth psychologists know this. People know this. I mean, it's as simple as passive aggressive. There's a passive aggressive aspect to the victim archetype, the victim narrative. There's a significant degree of hostility and malice sitting right underneath it. And we get to see that being played out significantly today. And I think we all would do ourselves a big favor to look at it, to see it for what it is, to be careful with it, to be wise. There's hurt that we want to talk about as part of a healing process, but then there's hurt that people just wallow in an indulgent manner. And be suspicious of that. It's part of who we are. It's part of the human psyche. We all do it in our different ways. We all project it out if we're not aware of it. So now is a wonderful learning opportunity. See a lot of revenge right now taking place in the name of, in the name of justice. Because that's what the immature ego does with its woundedness. It goes on on a mission for revenge. This is part of, of the entitlement dynamic that I've described many times, is that, by nature, it seems as human beings, we feel entitled to certain things, certain needs being met, to be treated in a certain way. And when that doesn't happen, we feel robbed. And we feel robbed of something, we feel hurt, and underneath that we feel angry. And then whatever was taken from us, we want back. We want it back with interest. So the idea there of the immature or shadow side of the victim mentality is that the victim feels robbed of something. Now they want something back, but with interest. In other words, payback with interest. It's not about healing. It's not about, that's why we're not seeing this. We're seeing division rather than healing. Because if I'm hurting, if I've been hurt, I would want healing for everybody, not just me. Right? I mean, that's kind of the more mature thing that we end up with, right? Where we want to gravitate to. We want we want justice for all, not street justice. That's a very personalized, again, hate-driven pursuit. So anyway, folks, yeah, I wanted to share some of these ideas with you as I'm working through them as I prepare for the radio show this Thursday. Again, I hope you'll join us as we talk about this from 6 to 7 on the 11th of April. And I'm going to, of course, post this video up onto my channel. And yeah, let's keep talking about this stuff because we really need to. This shadows, in my opinion, the shadow side of the victim archetype or narrative is one of the most insidious, most damaging dynamics, if you will, or aspects of the psyche, because it's almost like because the sword is hidden in the cloak, It's like the passive aggressive, on the outside, it just looks all right and, and justified, but underneath it, there's just such malice. And there's such cruelty hidden underneath it, and how it manifests itself in our relationships, in our communities, is just nothing short of diabolical and insidious to the core. So now, though, is a great time for all of us to get a better look at this, so we can be more capable of demonstrating personal accountability, which will allow us to integrate that pain and that fire that's attached to that in a healthy way. So I hope that gives you something to think about. Like I said, this is a work in progress, but it is an extension of the work that I've been doing for 20-something years. But I just really felt inspired to share this with you today, and I hope that we can all be on this page of really looking at this stuff as people interested in the evolution of our consciousness, and not get swept into the tidal wave of entitlement and indulgence, or into the quicksand of the craziness and the toxicity that are also out there in our communities. So you guys have a good day, and I will keep adding to this. Looking forward to your comments, and kind of see what you're seeing, if you will, what you're noticing in our society today that may be similar to some of these observations. So take care.